8-year-old Tommy Peterson was collecting pine cones for his mother's craft project when he heard the weak groaning echoing through the dense Michigan forest. Following the sound deeper into the woods, he discovered something that would change everything. A massive man in leather and chains was bound to an ancient oak tree, blood crusted on his face, barely conscious after what appeared to be a brutal beating. The patch on his vest read "Hell's Angels" in bold letters, a name that made grown men cross the street in fear. Most children would have run screaming. Most adults would have pretended they saw nothing and walked away quietly. But Tommy Peterson wasn't most people. He approached the dying stranger with the fearless compassion that only children possess, offering water from his canteen and promising help was coming. What happened next would become legend among bikers across the country. But how does an 8-year-old boy earn the eternal loyalty of the most feared motorcycle club in America? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Tommy's legs pumped furiously as he sprinted through the underbrush, branches catching at his jacket while his mind raced faster than his feet. The image of the bloodied man chained to that oak tree burned behind his eyes. He had to get help, and fast. Breaking through the tree line, Tommy spotted the old county road about 50 yards ahead. His lungs burned as he reached the cracked asphalt, frantically digging into his pocket for the beat-up flip phone his mother had given him for emergencies. The ancient device had a cracked screen and barely held a charge, but it was his lifeline now, with shaking fingers. Tommy dialed 911. The phone rang once, twice, before a calm female voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? There's a man chained to a tree. Tommy gasped, still catching his breath. He's hurt real bad and bleeding everywhere. A pause. Slow down, sweetheart. What's your name? Tommy Peterson. I'm on County Road 47 near the old Miller farm. There's a man in the woods, and somebody beat him up and left him to die. Tommy, are you safe right now? Are you hurt? I'm okay, but he's not. He's got chains around him and he can barely talk. Please, you have to send someone. The dispatcher's tone shifted to urgent professionalism. We're sending units now, Tommy. Can you describe the man? Tommy swallowed hard, remembering the intimidating figure that would have terrified most adults. He's really big and has lots of tattoos. His jacket says Hell's Angels on it. Another pause, longer this time. Did you say Hell's Angels, Tommy? Yes, ma'am. But he didn't hurt me or nothing. He just looked really scared when I gave him water. You gave him water? Tommy, where are you exactly right now? I'm on the road, but I need to go back to him. He's all alone, and he might die if nobody helps him. Tommy, I need you to stay exactly where you are. Do not go back into the woods. The paramedics and police are coming, okay? But Tommy was already pocketing the phone and turning back toward the forest. He couldn't leave the man alone. Something in those pain-filled eyes had called out to him. A desperate plea that transcended the scary leather and intimidating patches. Racing back through the trees, Tommy found the clearing where Marcus Razor Mackenzie hung against the oak tree, his head lolling forward. The man's breathing was shallow, labored. Hey, mister, Tommy whispered, approaching carefully. I called for help. They're coming! Razor's eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty on the small boy standing before him. His voice came out as a rasp. Kid, you came back. I wasn't going to leave you here alone. Tommy pulled out his metal canteen again, unscrewing the cap. Want some more water? Razor nodded weakly, and Tommy carefully tilted the canteen to his lips. Most of the water ran down the man's chin, but some made it into his mouth. What's your name, mister? Razor, he managed between labored breaths. That's a funny name. I'm Tommy. Despite his condition, Razor almost smiled. Nice to meet you, Tommy. The sound of sirens began echoing through the forest, growing louder by the second. Tommy felt relief wash over him. Help was finally coming. Hear that? The ambulance is here. You're gonna be okay now. Razor's eyes fixed on Tommy with an intensity that seemed to cut through his pain. You saved my life, kid. I just did what anybody would do. No, Razor whispered, his voice gaining strength for a moment. You did what? What somebody with real courage does. I won't forget this. The paramedics crashed through the underbrush, led by a sheriff's deputy who stopped short when he saw the scene. A small boy standing protectively near a chained Hell's Angel, offering comfort to one of the most feared men in the county. "Step back, son," the deputy said gently, but Tommy shook his head. "He's hurt really bad. Somebody chained him up here and beat him." Tommy's voice carried a fierce protectiveness that surprised the adults. "He needs help right now." The paramedics moved quickly, assessing Razor's condition while bolt cutters freed him from his restraints. As they loaded him onto a stretcher, Razor's eyes never left Tommy. "I'll find you," Razor whispered as they carried him toward the ambulance. "I'll find you and make this right." Tommy watched the ambulance disappear through the trees, not fully understanding the weight of the promise that had just been made to him. The antiseptic smell of the hospital corridor made Tommy's nose wrinkle as he walked beside his parents toward the intensive care unit. His mother, Sarah, kept a protective hand on his shoulder, while his father, Jim, carried a small bouquet of flowers they'd picked from their garden. "Are you sure about this, Tommy?" his mother asked for the third time. "We can just leave the flowers at the nurse's station." "I want to see if he's okay," Tommy insisted, his 8-year-old determination unwavering. "I promised I'd check on him." The ICU doors opened with a soft whoosh, revealing a maze of beeping machines and hushed conversations. Nurse Patricia Williams approached them with a gentle smile, having spoken with the family earlier about their unusual request. "He's been asking about you," she told Tommy quietly. "Room 314, but he's still pretty banged up. So don't be scared by all the tubes and wires." Tommy nodded solemnly and pushed open the door to find Razor propped up in bed, his face a patchwork of bruises and stitches. The leather vest that had seemed so intimidating in the forest now hung on a chair beside the bed, looking worn and vulnerable under the harsh hospital lighting. "Tommy!" Razor's voice was stronger now, though still rough around the edges. "You came. I brought you flowers," Tommy said, climbing onto the visitor's chair so he could see over the bed rails. "My dad says flowers help people feel better." Razor accepted the small bouquet with hands that Tommy noticed were gentler than their size suggested. "Thank you, kid. These are beautiful. What happened to you out there?" Tommy asked with the directness that only children possessed. "Why did somebody chain you up?" Razor glanced at Tommy's parents, who nodded their permission for honesty. "Some bad men didn't like me very much. They thought they could scare me by hurting me. But you're not scared now. Not anymore." Razor's eyes softened as he looked at the boy. "You know why?" Tommy shook his head. "Because a brave kid showed me that there are still good people in the world. People who help strangers even when they're scared." "I wasn't scared," Tommy said matter-of-factly. "No." Razor raised an eyebrow. "Not even a little bit?" "My vest there has some pretty scary patches on it." Tommy studied the leather vest with curious eyes. "What do they all mean?" Razor carefully reached for the vest, his movement slow due to his injuries. "This one here," he pointed to a patch with wings, "means I've been riding with my brothers for 15 years. This one means I served in the military before I joined the club." "You were a soldier." "Army Rangers. Did 3 tours overseas before I came home and found my motorcycle family." Tommy's eyes widened with interest rather than fear. "Are all the Hell's Angels soldiers?" "Some are. Some are mechanics, teachers, construction workers. We're just regular people who happen to ride motorcycles together." Razor's voice grew serious. "But the vest means something special. It means brotherhood. It means we look out for each other no matter what. Like how I looked out for you." Razor smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed since waking up in the hospital. "Exactly like that, Tommy, except you didn't even know me and you still helped. That makes you braver than most grown men I know. My mom says helping people is just what you're supposed to do. Your mom is a smart lady." Razor looked at Tommy's parents with respect. "You raised a good kid." Sarah Peterson stepped forward, her initial nervousness about her son befriending a Hell's Angel gradually fading. "The doctor says you're going to make a full recovery, thanks to your boy here. Another few hours in those woods and—" Razor trailed off, not wanting to complete that thought in front of Tommy. "When you get better, will you come visit us?" Tommy asked. "I want to show you my bicycle." "It's not a motorcycle, but it's pretty fast," Razor laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise him. "I'd like that very much, Tommy, if your parents say it's okay." Jim Peterson, who had been quietly observing the interaction, finally spoke up. "Any friend of Tommy's is welcome at our house. I need to make some phone calls," Razor said, his tone becoming more serious. "My brothers need to know what happened here." "They need to know about you, Tommy. Will they want to meet me too?" Razor's expression grew thoughtful as he considered the implications of his next words. "Tommy, my brothers have a code. When someone saves one of us, especially the way you saved me, that's something we never forget, ever." The secure phone in Razor's hospital room buzzed with the distinctive ringtone that meant brotherhood business. Despite his injuries, he answered on the first ring. "Razor here. Jesus Christ, Marcus, we heard you were dead." The gruff voice belonged to Steele Murphy, president of the Michigan chapter. "What the hell happened out there?" Razor shifted carefully in his hospital bed, still feeling the ache of broken ribs and the pull of stitches. "Serpents jumped me on the way back from Detroit. 3 of them, baseball bats and chains. Left me for dead in the woods, sons of bitches. We'll handle this, brother. Nobody touches one of ours without consequences. Steele, wait. That's not why I'm calling." Razor's voice carried an unusual note that made his chapter president pause. "I need you to listen to what I'm about to tell you because it's going to sound impossible." "I'm listening." "An 8-year-old kid found me chained to that tree. Kid named Tommy Peterson. He could have run, could have pretended he never saw me, but instead he stayed. Gave me water, called 911, sat with me until the paramedics came." Silence stretched across the encrypted connection before Steele's voice returned. Quieter now. "A kid? An actual kid?" 8 years old, Steele, fearless as they come. This boy saw a dying Hell's Angel and didn't hesitate for a second to help. Where's this kid now? Safe at home with his family. Good people, Steele, the kind of people who raise kids with real courage. Razor paused, choosing his next words carefully. "This needs to go up the chain, all the way up." Steele understood immediately. In the hierarchy of Hell's Angels Brotherhood, certain events transcended local chapter politics. A civilian risking their life to save a member was the kind of story that demanded recognition from the highest levels of the organization. "I'll make the calls." "What do you want to happen here, Razor?" "The kid deserves to know what he did matters. What it means in our world when someone shows that kind of courage." Within hours, Razor's story had traveled through encrypted channels across 5 states. Chapter presidents from Ohio to Illinois received the same impossible tale. A child had saved one of their own, expecting nothing in return except the satisfaction of doing what was right. In Detroit, Chapter President Big Mike Torino listened to the story while methodically cleaning his motorcycle in the club garage. The ritual of maintenance helped him think through complicated situations, and this was definitely complicated. "You sure about this, Steele?" he asked into his secure phone. "Kid's really 8 years old?" Razor doesn't lie about things like this. "Says the boy's got more backbone than most prospects we've seen." "What's the family situation?" "Working class. Father's a mechanic, mother works at the school. Good people, according to Razor. No agenda, no angle. Kid just did what he thought was right." In Milwaukee, Chapter President Thunder Jackson was having a similar conversation with his vice president. "When's the last time you heard of a civilian, especially a kid, going out of their way to help one of us?" "Never," came the honest reply. "Most people cross the street when they see our colors coming." "Exactly. This Tommy Peterson kid didn't just help Razor. He showed the kind of respect for human life that we're supposed to protect." The conversations continued across the network, each chapter leader grappling with the same unprecedented situation. Children were sacred in Hell's Angels culture. Anyone who harmed a child faced the Brotherhood's most severe judgment. But a child who risked his own safety to save a member, that was uncharted territory. In Chicago, the regional president made the decision that would change everything. "Put out the word," he told his communications officer. "Every chapter within 500 miles needs to hear this story. And start making calls about availability for next weekend." What are you thinking, boss? I'm thinking that Tommy Peterson needs to understand what he did. Needs to see what real brotherhood looks like when someone earns our respect. Back in the Michigan hospital, Razor's phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID showed a number he recognized but had never expected to see on his personal device. Marcus Mackenzie. The voice carried the authority of decades in the Brotherhood. Yes, sir, this is Thunder. I've been hearing stories about a young man named Tommy Peterson. Stories that make me think we need to pay this family a visit. What's your condition? I'll be released tomorrow, sir. Ready for duty. Good. Because we're going to show this boy what happens when someone shows real courage in our world. How does 2,000 bikes sound to you, brother? Razor felt his heart rate spike, and it had nothing to do with his injuries. Sir, you heard me? 2,000. Every chapter from here to the Colorado line wants to meet the kid who saved one of ours. Think his family can handle that kind of attention? Razor thought about Tommy's fearless approach to a chained Hell's Angel, his absolute refusal to abandon someone in need. I think Tommy Peterson can handle just about anything, sir. The Sacred Bones Tavern in downtown Detroit had seen plenty of Hell's Angels meetings over the decades, but nothing quite like this one. Chapter presidents from Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin sat around a scarred wooden table that had witnessed countless Brotherhood decisions. The ancient wooden gavel lay in the center, its handle worn smooth by generations of hands that had wielded it during the most important votes in club history. Thunder Jackson, the regional president, called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of the gavel. The sound echoed through the smoky room, commanding immediate silence from the assembled leaders. Brothers, we're here to discuss something that's never happened before in our history, Thunder began, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of 30 years in the Brotherhood. A civilian, an 8-year-old boy, risked his life to save one of our own. The question before us today is simple. How do we honor that courage? Steele Murphy, representing the Michigan chapter where the incident occurred, stood first. Brothers, I've known Razor Mackenzie for 15 years. He's never asked for anything, never exaggerated a story, never put his own interests above the club's. When he tells me this kid, Tommy Peterson, showed more guts than most grown men, I believe him completely. Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Razor's reputation for honesty was unquestioned among the leadership. Big Mike Torino from Detroit leaned forward, his massive frame making the chair creak. I've been in this Brotherhood for 27 years. I've seen courage, I've seen cowardice, and I've seen everything in between. But an 8-year-old walking up to a chained Hell's Angel and offering water? That's not just courage, brothers. That's pure heart. The question is, interjected Carlos Rivera from the Toledo chapter, what kind of message does this send? We start honoring civilians. Where does it end? Thunder raised the gavel for silence. Carlos raises a fair point. Let's be clear about what we're discussing here. This isn't about giving patches to every good Samaritan who helps a broken-down biker. This is about recognizing something unprecedented. A child who saw one of us dying and chose compassion over fear. Bear Thompson from Milwaukee stood slowly, his weathered face reflecting years of hard decisions. My grandson is Tommy Peterson's age. If I asked that boy what he'd do if he found a Hell's Angel chained in the woods, you know what he'd say? He'd say he'd run home and tell his mama. And that would be the smart thing to do. But Tommy Peterson didn't do the smart thing. He did the right thing. The room fell silent as Bear's words sank in. The distinction between smart and right resonated with men who'd built their lives around a code that valued loyalty above safety. I propose, Bear continued, that we show this boy what real brotherhood looks like. Not to scare him, not to intimidate his family, but to demonstrate that courage gets recognized in our world. That doing right by one of us means something. Snake Williams from the Indiana chapter, known for his conservative approach to club business, surprised everyone by standing in support. Brothers, we spend a lot of time talking about how civilians don't understand us, how they judge us by our colors instead of our character. Well, here's a kid who saw past all that. Saw a human being who needed help and gave it without hesitation. If we don't honor that, what does it say about who we really are? Thunder called for discussion, and the debate that followed revealed the depth of feeling Tommy's story had generated throughout the Brotherhood. Some worried about drawing unwanted attention from law enforcement. Others questioned whether an 8-year-old could truly understand the significance of such recognition. But as the hours passed, a consensus emerged. Tommy Peterson had done something extraordinary, and extraordinary actions deserved extraordinary recognition. All in favor of organizing a tribute ride to honor Tommy Peterson, Thunder called. Raising the gavel, every hand in the room went up without hesitation. Motion carries unanimously. The gavel fell with finality. Now let's talk logistics. How many chapters can we get for this? Steele pulled out a notebook, filled with phone numbers. I've been making preliminary calls. Every chapter within 500 miles wants in. We're looking at potentially 2,000 riders. 2,000, Thunder repeated slowly, understanding the magnitude of what they were proposing. That's the largest peaceful gathering in our history. This kid earned it, Big Mike said simply. Tommy Peterson showed our Brotherhood the kind of respect we've been waiting our whole lives to receive from the outside world. Time we showed him what that respect means to us. The gavel fell one final time, sealing a decision that would change everything for a small boy who'd simply done what he thought was right. The hand-drawn route map spread across. Thunder Jackson's kitchen table looked like a military operation. Red lines traced highways from 5 different states, all converging on the small town of Cedar Falls, Michigan. Numbers scrawled beside each route indicated chapter strength. Detroit, 180 riders. Milwaukee, 95 riders. Toledo, 67 riders. The logistics of moving 2,000. Motorcycles across state lines required coordination. That would have impressed the Pentagon. Thunder's phone hadn't stopped ringing for 3 days. Chapter presidents from as far away as Colorado were calling, wanting to be part of what everyone was calling the Tommy Peterson ride. The story of the 8-year-old boy who'd saved Razor had spread through the Brotherhood like wildfire, capturing imaginations and stirring emotions in men who'd thought they'd seen everything. "Boss, we got a problem," announced Diesel Martinez, Thunder's logistics coordinator, as he hung up from another call. "Michigan State Police are mobilizing their entire tactical unit. They think we're planning some kind of invasion." Thunder studied the map, understanding the law enforcement perspective. 2,000 Hells Angels converging on a town of 3,500 people would look threatening to anyone who didn't understand the purpose. "Get me Sheriff Williams from Calhoun County. He's dealt with us before, knows we're not looking for trouble." Meanwhile, 200 miles north in Cedar Falls, Mayor Patricia Henderson was having the worst week of her political career. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since word leaked about the planned biker gathering. Half the calls were from terrified residents, demanding she call out the National Guard. The other half were from media outlets wanting to cover what they were, calling the largest Hells Angels gathering in Midwest history. "Madam Mayor," her assistant announced nervously, "there's an FBI agent here to see you." Special Agent Sarah Chen entered the mayor's office, carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "Mayor Henderson, I'm here about the planned motorcycle gathering scheduled for this weekend. Agent Chen, I want to be clear that the city has not authorized any gathering. We only learned about this through unofficial channels. That's what concerns us. When Hells Angels chapters organize without going through proper permits, it usually means they're planning something that wouldn't get approved through normal channels." Agent Chen opened her folder, revealing surveillance photos and intelligence reports. "We're tracking motorcycle movements from Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Conservative estimates put the gathering at 1,800 to 2,000 riders. That's 3 times larger than any previous Hells Angels event in this region." Mayor Henderson studied the photos, showing groups of leather-clad bikers at gas stations and truck stops, all heading toward her quiet town. "What do you recommend?" "Honestly, pray they're really here for whatever innocent purpose they claim, because we don't have the resources to control a riot involving 2,000 bikers. At Cedar Falls Elementary School, Principal Janet Morrison was dealing with a different kind of crisis. Parents had been calling all morning, demanding to know if school would be cancelled due to the biker invasion. Some wanted their children kept home for safety. Others were threatening to pull their kids from school permanently if the administration didn't take adequate precautions. "Mrs. Morrison," the school secretary announced over the intercom, "Tommy Peterson's mother is here to see you." Sarah Peterson entered the principal's office looking exhausted and overwhelmed. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept much since learning that her son's act of kindness had somehow triggered a massive motorcycle rally. "Sarah, please sit down. How is Tommy handling all this attention? He doesn't really understand what's happening. He keeps asking if his friend Razor is coming to visit like he promised. Tommy has no idea that his simple act of kindness has apparently mobilized half the Hells Angels in the Midwest." Principal Morrison nodded sympathetically. "We've had 17 parents call this morning demanding we keep their children away from school during the gathering. They're afraid." "Of what?" "Tommy saved a man's life. These bikers are coming to thank him, not hurt anyone. I know that and you know that, but fear doesn't always listen to logic. Some parents are talking about keeping their kids home indefinitely, maybe even moving to other districts." Sarah Peterson felt anger rising in her chest. Her son had shown pure compassion, had risked his own safety to help a stranger. And somehow that act of goodness was being twisted into something threatening by people who didn't understand. "My son did the right thing," she said firmly. "If people want to punish him for showing courage and kindness, then maybe this isn't the kind of community we want to raise him in anyway." Back at the Hells Angels Coordination Center, Razor Mackenzie was reviewing the final route plans, despite still recovering from his injuries. The doctor had cleared him for light activity, but organizing the largest tribute ride in Brotherhood history hardly qualified as light activity. His secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from Steele Murphy. "Razor, we might have a problem. FBI surveillance teams have been spotted at 3 different staging areas. They're tracking our movements." "Expected," Razor replied calmly. 2,000 bikers don't move across state lines without federal attention. "Are the boys staying clean?" "Absolutely. Every chapter president has emphasized this is a peaceful tribute. Anyone carrying illegal weapons or substances gets left behind. We're not giving law enforcement any excuse to turn this into a confrontation." "Good. Tommy Peterson deserves better than to have his story overshadowed by unnecessary drama." As the week progressed, the small town of Cedar Falls found itself at the center of a gathering storm that would test everyone's assumptions about courage, brotherhood, and what it truly meant to do the right thing. The police barricade plans covered Chief Robert Dalton's entire desk like a tactical puzzle from hell. 27 years in law enforcement had never prepared him for managing an event of this magnitude. The official documents showed roadblock positions, officer assignments, and emergency protocols designed to contain what everyone feared could become the largest civil disturbance in the county's history. "Chief, we've got the state police tactical team staged at the armory," reported Deputy Martinez, consulting his clipboard. "FBI has surveillance units positioned at all major highway access points. They're treating this like a potential domestic terrorism event." Chief Dalton rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of responsibility for a town that had never experienced anything more dramatic than high school football rivalries. "What's the latest count on incoming bikers?" "Intelligence estimates 1,900 to 2,200 riders converging from 12 different states. Some chapters are coming from as far as Texas and North Carolina after hearing about the Tommy Peterson story." The irony wasn't lost on Chief Dalton. A story about an 8-year-old's kindness had mobilized law enforcement resources typically reserved for natural disasters or terrorist threats. Fear had transformed an act of compassion into a perceived threat that required SWAT teams and federal intervention. At Cedar Falls High School, the emergency town meeting had drawn the largest crowd in the building's history. The gymnasium, overflowed, with residents clutching copies of the police barricade plans that had somehow leaked to the local newspaper. Fear hung in the air, like smoke from a barely contained fire. Mayor Henderson stood at the podium, trying to maintain calm while fielding increasingly agitated questions from constituents who'd never imagined their quiet town could become the epicenter of national attention. "Mrs. Patterson, I understand your concerns," the mayor said to an elderly woman waving a newspaper. "But we have no evidence that these bikers intend any harm to our community. 2,000 Hell's Angels, Mayor Henderson." Mrs. Patterson's voice shook with indignation. "My granddaughter lives 3 blocks from where they're supposedly gathering. What if something goes wrong? What if they start drinking and fighting? What if innocent people get hurt?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Tom Bradley, who owned the hardware store on Main Street, stood up with the authority of someone who'd lived in Cedar Falls his entire life. "I'm boarding up my windows tomorrow morning, encouraging all the other business owners to do the same. Better safe than sorry." "With respect, Tom," interjected Maria Santos, Tommy's 3rd-grade teacher, "we're talking about men coming to honor a child who showed extraordinary courage. Maybe we should focus on that instead of assuming the worst." "Easy for you to say, Maria. You don't have a business to protect. 2,000 bikers can cause a lot of damage, even if they don't mean." 2. Near the back of the gymnasium, Sarah and Jim Peterson sat quietly, watching their community tear itself apart over their son's act of kindness. The weight of unintended consequences pressed down on them like a physical burden. Tommy had saved a man's life, and somehow that simple act of human decency had become the catalyst for fear and division. "Maybe we should leave town for the weekend," Sarah whispered to her husband. "Take Tommy somewhere safe until this all blows over." Jim Peterson looked around at neighbors he'd known for 15 years. People who'd celebrated Tommy's birth, attended his birthday parties, cheered at his Little League games. Now those same neighbors were treating his son's heroism as if it were a dangerous contagion that threatened their safety. "No," Jim said quietly but firmly. "Tommy did nothing wrong. We're not running away because other people choose fear over understanding." At the county sheriff's office, Sheriff Williams was fielding calls from state and federal agencies who seemed more interested in preventing embarrassment than protecting citizens. The FBI wanted contingency plans for mass arrests. The state police wanted authorization to use non-lethal crowd control weapons. The governor's office wanted assurance that the situation wouldn't become a public relations nightmare. "Sheriff," his dispatcher announced over the radio, "we've got reports of motorcycle convoys forming at truck stops along I-94. State police count 400. Bikes at the Kalamazoo staging area alone." Sheriff Williams studied the tactical map spread across his desk, trying to balance legitimate security concerns with the possibility that everyone was overreacting to what might be the largest gesture of gratitude in Hell's Angels history. Meanwhile, at a gas station 30 miles outside Cedar Falls, Serpent chapter members Jake Morrison and Tony Ricci watched the first wave of Hell's Angels arrive, their own motorcycles hidden behind the building. The rival gang had been planning retaliation against Razor for months, but the massive gathering presented an opportunity too perfect to ignore. "Look at all those colors," Morrison muttered, studying the parade of leather vests through binoculars. "Like shooting fish in a barrel. Boss wants maximum impact," Ricci replied, checking his concealed weapon. "Hit them during their little tribute ceremony. Show everyone what happens when Hell's Angels get soft." The stage was set for a confrontation that would test whether Tommy Peterson's simple act of kindness could survive the fear and violence that threatened to overwhelm it. Tommy Peterson sat on his bedroom floor, clutching the small wooden cross necklace his grandmother had given him for his 7th birthday. Through his window, he could see neighbors boarding up their storefronts and hear the constant buzz of news helicopters circling overhead. The weight of everyone's fear pressed down on his 8-year-old shoulders like a heavy blanket he couldn't shake off. "Tommy, dinner's ready," his mother called from downstairs. but her voice carried a tension he'd never heard before. He found his parents at the kitchen table, barely touching their food, while speaking in hushed voices that stopped abruptly when he entered the room. The silence felt different from their usual, comfortable dinner conversations, loaded with worries they thought he was too young to understand. "Mom, why is everyone so scared?" Tommy asked, sliding into his chair. "I thought people would be happy that Mr. Razor's friends want to say thank you." Sarah Peterson looked at her husband, searching for words that could explain adult fears to a child who'd acted with pure courage. "Honey, sometimes when big groups of people come together, other people worry that something bad might happen. But they're coming to say thank you to me. That's good, right?" Jim Peterson reached across the table and took his son's small hand in his calloused mechanic's fingers. "What you did for Mr. Razor was very good. Tommy, the problem is that some people don't understand that these bikers are really just regular people who happen to ride motorcycles. Like how people were scared of Mr. Razor because of his vest. But he was really nice. Exactly like that." Tommy fingered his grandmother's cross, remembering the stories she'd told him about standing up for what was right, even when other people didn't understand. Grandma Rose had lived through the civil rights movement, had taught him that courage meant doing the right thing, especially when it was difficult. Grandma Rose always says that being scared is okay, but letting fear stop you from being kind isn't okay, Tommy said quietly. "She says that's how bad things happen in the world." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as her 8-year-old son articulated wisdom that many adults struggled to grasp. "Grandma Rose is very smart. I want to meet them," Tommy announced, with the sudden decisiveness that had led him to approach a chained Hell's Angel in the first place. "I want to meet Mr. Razor's friends and thank them for coming." "Tommy," his father said carefully, "there are going to be almost 2,000 bikers here. That's a lot of people. Some folks think it might be dangerous, but you don't think so, right, Dad? You think they're good people like Mr. Razor?" Jim Peterson looked at his son's earnest face, seeing the same fearless compassion that had saved a stranger's life. "I think anyone who travels hundreds of miles just to thank a little boy for showing kindness is probably good people, yes. Then I want to meet them. I want to tell them that what they're doing is really nice, and I want to ask them not to scare people in our town." Sarah and Jim exchanged glances, recognizing their son's determination. This was the same resolve that had kept him in those woods with Razor until help arrived. The same courage that had led him to offer water to a dying stranger without considering his own safety. "Tommy," his mother said gently, "if we let you meet them, you have to promise to stay close to us at all times. And if we say it's time to leave, we leave immediately. Deal?" "Deal," Tommy agreed, then paused thoughtfully. "Mom, can I write them a letter? Like to tell them I'm excited to meet them, but also to ask them to be extra nice to everyone in town." "That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart." Tommy climbed down from his chair and ran to his room, returning with his school notebook and a pencil. He sat at the kitchen table, tongue poking out in concentration as he carefully formed each letter. "Dear Hell's Angels," he wrote in his careful 8-year-old script, "thank you for coming to visit me. I'm very excited to meet you and say thank you for being so nice about me helping Mr. Razor. I hope you will like our town. Some people are scared because they don't know you yet, but I told them you are good people like Mr. Razor. Please be extra nice to everyone so they can see that bikers are just regular people who help each other. I can't wait to meet you. Your friend, Tommy Peterson." He folded the letter carefully and handed it to his father. "Can you make sure they get this before they come to town?" Jim Peterson read the letter and felt his heart swell with pride and worry in equal measure. His son's innocent faith in human goodness was both beautiful and terrifying, in a world that often rewarded cynicism over compassion. "I'll make sure they get it, son. I promise." Outside, the first distant rumble of motorcycle engines could be heard on the horizon, growing steadily louder as 2,000 riders began their final approach to a small town that would never be the same. The first rumble began at 5:47 a.m., a distant thunder that rolled across the sleeping town of Cedar Falls like an approaching storm. By dawn, the sound had grown into a continuous roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of every building on Main Street. The lead rider's flag, a sacred banner depicting an eagle, clutching lightning bolts cut through the morning mist as the first wave of Hell's Angels crested the hill. Overlooking the town, Thunder Jackson rode point, the honor flag attached to his bike streaming behind him as nearly 300 motorcycles followed in perfect formation. The sight was both magnificent and terrifying, a river of chrome and leather flowing down the main highway like something from another world. Behind curtained windows, residents peered out at the spectacle with mixtures of awe and fear. Mrs. Patterson clutched her rosary beads as she watched from her kitchen window, counting motorcycles until she lost track somewhere around the 200 mark. The sound was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, not chaotic or aggressive, but organized and purposeful, like a military parade conducted on two wheels. At the police station, Chief Dalton monitored radio chatter as his officers reported from various checkpoints around town. "Chief, this is Unit 7 at the north entrance. First group just passed through. No incidents, no violations. They're actually following traffic laws better than most Sunday drivers. Copy that, Unit 7. All units maintain position, but do not interfere unless there's an actual violation." The irony wasn't lost on Chief Dalton. He'd prepared for chaos and violence, but what he was witnessing looked more like a precision demonstration than a biker invasion. Every rider wore a helmet, maintained proper spacing, and signaled lane changes with military precision, a T. The designated gathering area, a large field on the outskirts of town that Thunder had secured with the landowner's permission, the bikers began, arranging themselves in orderly rows. Chapter banners were unfurled and planted in assigned positions: Detroit, Milwaukee, Chicago, Toledo, Indianapolis. Each group took pride in their presentation, understanding that they represented not just themselves, but the entire Brotherhood's reputation. Tommy Peterson pressed his face against his bedroom window, watching the incredible procession with wide-eyed wonder. He'd never seen so many motorcycles in one place, never imagined that his simple act of kindness could bring together so many people from so far away. "Dad, look," he called excitedly. "They all came!" They really all came just to say thank you. Jim Peterson joined his son at the window, equally amazed by the scope of the gathering. The field that had been empty yesterday morning now looked like a small city of motorcycles and leather-clad figures. American flags flew alongside chapter banners, and the organization was impressive. Clearly, these men had experience managing large gatherings. "Tommy," his father said quietly, "I think we're about to witness something that's never happened before." At the field, Razor Mackenzie climbed carefully off his motorcycle, still feeling the effects of his injuries, but determined not to miss this historic moment. His chapter brothers gathered around him, their expressions mixing pride and anticipation as they prepared to meet the boy who'd become a legend in their world. "Razor, you sure the kid's family is okay with all this?" asked Steele Murphy, surveying the massive gathering. "This is a lot more attention than most 8-year-olds are used to." "Tommy Peterson isn't most 8-year-olds, Razor replied, checking his phone for messages from the boy's father. "Trust me, brother. This kid can handle more than you think." News crews began setting up equipment along the perimeter of the field, their cameras capturing images that would soon appear on television screens across the country. The story of Tommy Peterson and the Hells Angels had captured national attention, transforming a local act of kindness into a symbol of something larger, proof that courage and compassion could bridge any divide. Reporter Janet Moss adjusted her microphone as she prepared for a live broadcast. "This is Janet Moss reporting from Cedar Falls, Michigan, where nearly 2,000 Hells Angels bikers have gathered to honor 8-year-old Tommy Peterson, the boy who saved the life of one of their members. What we're witnessing here appears to be the largest peaceful gathering in Hells Angels history. all triggered by a child's simple act of courage. In the distance, Tommy could see a small group of bikers walking toward his house, led by a familiar figure wearing a leather vest he recognized. Razor had kept his promise. He'd come back, and he'd brought his entire world with him. The sound of 2,000 motorcycle engines idling created a constant background hum that seemed to make the very air vibrate with anticipation. Cedar Falls had awakened to find itself at the center of something unprecedented, a gathering that would challenge every assumption about fear, courage, and the power of simple human kindness. The knock on the Peterson family's front door came at exactly 9:02 a.m., gentle but firm. Tommy raced to answer it, his parents close behind, and found Razor standing on their porch alongside 3 other Hell's Angels who looked like they could bench press small cars. Despite their intimidating size, all 4 men had removed their sunglasses and stood with respectful posture that reminded Jim Peterson of soldiers at attention. "Mr. and Mrs. Peterson," Razor said formally, "I'd like you to meet some of my brothers. This is Thunder Jackson, our regional president. Steele Murphy, my chapter president. And this is Bear Thompson from Milwaukee." Each man stepped forward to shake hands with Tommy's parents, their grips firm but careful, their voices quiet and respectful. Thunder Jackson, despite his nickname and fearsome appearance, spoke with the measured tone of someone accustomed to diplomacy. "Mr. Peterson, we want to thank you for raising a son with the kind of courage most grown men never show. What Tommy did for our brother Razor is something we'll never forget. He just did what any decent person should do," Jim replied, though he felt oddly proud hearing his son's actions described in such reverent terms. "No, sir," Bear Thompson interjected gently. "Most people, decent or not, would have walked away. Fear makes people do that, and there's no shame in it. But your boy didn't walk away. He stayed. He helped. He showed the kind of heart that this world needs more of." Tommy stepped out from behind his parents, looking up at the 4 massive bikers without a trace of fear. "Mr. Razor, you look much better than when you were chained to that tree." Razor smiled, kneeling down to Tommy's eye level. "I feel much better too, thanks to you. Tommy, I want you to meet something very special." He reached into his vest and pulled out a small purple ribbon attached to a bronze star. "This is called a Purple Heart. Soldiers get it when they're wounded, fighting for their country." Tommy's eyes widened as he examined the medal. "Were you a soldier, Mr. Razor?" "I was, Army Rangers, and I want you to know that what you did in those woods took more courage than anything I ever did in the military. You saved my life, Tommy, and that makes you a hero in my book." Thunder Jackson stepped forward, carrying something wrapped in soft leather. "Tommy, we brought you something. It's never been done before in our brotherhood's history, so this is pretty special." He unwrapped the package to reveal a small leather jacket, clearly handmade, with intricate stitching and careful attention to detail. On the back was embroidered "Honorary Member," and below it "Courage Beyond Fear." "This jacket was made by some of the finest leather workers in our brotherhood," Thunder explained. "The patches on it are honorary. They mean you've earned our respect and our protection. You're the first person under 18 to ever receive anything like this." Tommy touched the soft leather with careful fingers, understanding instinctively that he was holding something significant. "It's beautiful. Can I put it on?" "Of course you can," Steele Murphy said, helping Tommy slip his arms through the sleeves. The jacket fit perfectly, clearly tailored specifically for him. "How does it feel?" "Like armor," Tommy said seriously, then looked up at the assembled bikers. "Like brave armor." Sarah Peterson felt tears in her eyes as she watched her son being honored by men who lived by codes of loyalty and brotherhood that most of the world didn't understand. The fear she'd felt about this gathering was dissolving, replaced by recognition that these were fundamentally good men who traveled hundreds of miles just to thank an 8-year-old for showing kindness. "Tommy," Razor said, "we were hoping you'd come down to the field and meet more of our brothers. Only if your parents think it's okay, of course. Can I, Mom?" "Please." Sarah looked at Jim, who nodded slightly. They'd come this far, and everything they'd witnessed suggested that their son was safer with these bikers than he'd be in most other crowds. Yes, sweetheart. We'll all go together. As they walked toward the field where 2,000 motorcycles waited, Tommy noticed that people were coming out of their houses, watching from porches and yards, with expressions that had shifted from fear to curiosity. The sight of a small boy wearing an honorary Hells Angels jacket, walking confidently beside men who'd clearly kill or die to protect him, was transforming the community's understanding of what they were witnessing. "Mr. Thunder," Tommy said, looking up at the regional president, "I wrote you guys a letter. Did you get it?" "We did, Tommy, and I want you to know that every single one of our brothers read it. Your words about being kind to your town, that means everything to us. We're going to make sure everyone here understands that Hell's Angels know how to respect good people." The field ahead buzzed with anticipation as 2,000 men waited to meet the boy who'd redefined what courage looked like. The town square of Cedar Falls had been transformed into something resembling a medieval ceremony, crossed with a military parade. 2,000 Hell's Angels stood in perfect formation, their motorcycles arranged in precise rows behind them, creating a sea of leather and chrome that stretched across the entire field. Chapter banners from 12 states flew proudly in the morning breeze, while at the center of it all, a small wooden platform had been constructed overnight. Tommy Peterson walked through the corridor of bikers, his new honorary jacket drawing nods of respect from men whose own colors had been earned through years of loyalty and brotherhood. The sight of an 8-year-old boy wearing Hell's Angels patches should have seemed absurd, but somehow it felt absolutely right to everyone present. Thunder Jackson stepped onto the platform and raised his hand for silence. The murmur of 2,000 voices died instantly, replaced by a quiet so profound that the distant sound of news helicopters seemed deafeningly loud. "Brothers," Thunder began, his voice carrying across the field without amplification, "we are gathered here today for something that has never happened in our history. We are here to honor courage. We are here to honor loyalty. We are here to honor a young man who saw one of our own dying and chose compassion over fear." A rumble of approval rolled through the assembled crowd, thousands of voices creating a sound like distant thunder. "Tommy Peterson," Thunder continued, "would you please join me up here?" Tommy climbed the wooden steps with his parents close behind, looking out over the massive gathering with wonder rather than fear. From the platform, he could see the full scope of what his simple act of kindness had created. Men from hundreds of miles away, all united by respect for what he'd done. Steel Murphy stepped forward, carrying a wooden box carved with intricate Hell's Angel symbols. "Tommy, this box contains patches from every chapter represented here today. Patches that tell the story of our brotherhood, our history, our values. We want you to have them, not to wear, but to remember that courage creates connections between people who might never have met otherwise." Tommy accepted the box with both hands, feeling its weight. "Thank you. But I have something for you too." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the letter he'd written the night before. "I wrote this for all of you. My dad said he'd make sure you got it, but I wanted to read it to you myself." Thunder knelt down beside Tommy, offering him the microphone that had been set up for the ceremony. Tommy's voice, young and clear, carried across the field as he read his carefully written words. "Dear Hell's Angels, thank you for coming to visit me. I'm very excited to meet you and say thank you for being so nice about me helping Mr. Razor. I hope you will like our town. Some people are scared because they don't know you yet, but I told them you are good people like Mr. Razor. Please be extra nice to everyone so they can see that bikers are just regular people who help each other. I can't wait to meet you. Your friend, Tommy Peterson." The silence that followed was profound. Hardened men who'd seen combat, survived street fights, and lived through decades of society's judgment found themselves moved by the simple words of a child who'd looked past their fearsome appearance and seen their humanity. Bear Thompson was the first to speak, his gruff voice carrying unexpected emotion. "Brothers, I've been wearing these colors for 23 years. I've been proud of them every single day. But I've never been more proud to be a Hell's Angel than I am right now. Standing here being judged worthy of this boy's friendship, the crowd erupted in agreement. 2,000 voices joining in a cheer that could be heard throughout the town. But it wasn't the aggressive roar that many residents had feared. It was the sound of men honoring something pure and good, something that reminded them of why they'd joined a brotherhood in the first place. From her position at the edge of the crowd, reporter Janet Moss spoke quietly into her microphone. What we're witnessing here is unprecedented. 2,000 members of what many consider America's most notorious motorcycle club gathered not for intimidation or confrontation, but to honor the courage of a single child. The transformation is remarkable. These men came here to pay tribute, and instead they seem to have been transformed by the very innocence they came to celebrate. As the ceremony continued, something magical began happening around the edges of the gathering. Residents of Cedar Falls, drawn by curiosity and Tommy's obvious safety, began approaching the outer ranks of bikers. Conversations started hesitantly. Questions about motorcycles, compliments on the organization, expressions of amazement at the peaceful nature of such a massive gathering. Margaret Chen, Tommy's elderly neighbor, surprised everyone by walking directly up to a group of Detroit chapter members. "Excuse me," she said politely, "but I wanted to thank you for coming so far to honor that boy. He's special, and it's nice to see that recognized." The walls of fear and misunderstanding that had separated the community from the bikers began crumbling, replaced by the simple human connection that Tommy had demonstrated was possible. When people chose to see past surface appearances to the character beneath, the transformation began with a simple mason jar that Bear Thompson pulled from his motorcycle's saddlebag. It was nothing special. A regular canning jar with a handwritten label that read, "For kids who need help." But when he placed it on a table near the ceremony platform, it represented something that would change everything. "Brothers," Bear announced to the assembled crowd, "we came here to honor Tommy Peterson's courage. But I've been thinking, maybe the best way to honor what he did is to help other kids who need it." He pulled a crumpled $20 bill from his wallet and dropped it into the jar, with a metallic clink that seemed to echo across the silent field. "Tommy saved one of ours. Maybe we can save some of theirs." The response was immediate and overwhelming. 2,000 Hell's Angels began moving toward the table, each man contributing whatever cash he had on hand. 5s, 10s, 20s, and hundreds disappeared into the growing collection as the simple mason jar was quickly replaced by larger containers brought from the bikers' gear. Tommy watched in amazement as the pile of money grew. "What's all that for?" Thunder Jackson knelt beside him, his expression serious but gentle. "Tommy, your town has a children's hospital, right? And that hospital needs money to help sick kids get better." "Yeah, my friend Sarah from school had to go there when she broke her leg really bad. Her mom said it was expensive. Well, we thought maybe we could help with that. What do you think?" Tommy's face lit up with understanding. "You want to give money to help sick kids like I helped Mr. Razor?" Exactly like that. Word of the spontaneous fundraiser spread beyond the Hell's Angels gathering. Local residents who had been watching from a distance began approaching, initially curious about the activity around the collection table. When they learned what was happening, many reached into their own pockets to contribute. Maria Santos, Tommy's teacher, was among the first townspeople to approach the collection. "This is incredible," she told Steele Murphy as she added her own contribution. "The children's wing at Regional Medical has been struggling with funding for months. How much do they need?" Steele asked. "Last I heard, they were about $50,000 short of their goal for new pediatric equipment." Steele looked at the growing collection, then at the hundreds of bikers still waiting to contribute. "I think we can do better than that." Dr. Patricia Williams from Cedar Falls Regional Medical arrived within an hour of learning about the fundraiser. She'd initially been skeptical when someone called to tell her that Hell's Angels were collecting money for her pediatric ward. But the sight of the massive organized effort convinced her that this was genuine. "Gentlemen, She addressed Thunder and the other chapter presidents. I have to admit, when my nurse called to tell me about this, I thought it was some kind of prank. No prank, Doc, Thunder replied. Tommy here taught us something about helping people who need it. Figured we should pay that lesson forward. Dr. Williams looked at Tommy in his honorary leather jacket, still amazed by the sight of a small boy who'd somehow earned the respect of the most feared motorcycle club in the country. Tommy, do you understand what these men are doing? They're helping sick kids get better, just like I helped Mr. Razor get better. That's right. And because of what you started, we're going to be able to buy equipment that will help hundreds of children over the years to come. As the collection continued, something remarkable happened. The artificial boundary between the Hells Angels gathering and the Cedar Falls community dissolved completely. Townspeople who had been boarding up their windows the day before were now working alongside bikers to organize the fundraiser. Children who had been kept inside for safety were now playing near the motorcycles, asking questions about engines and chrome, while their parents chatted with men they'd previously crossed streets to avoid. Mrs. Patterson, who had been among the most vocal opponents of the gathering, surprised everyone by approaching Bear Thompson with a plate of homemade cookies. I thought your men might be hungry, she said simply, and I wanted to apologize for judging you before I knew you. Bear accepted the cookies with genuine gratitude. Ma'am, you had every right to be concerned. 2,000 strangers showing up in your town would worry anyone. But I want you to know that your grandson Tommy has taught us all something about looking past appearances to see what's really in someone's heart. By afternoon, the collection jar had been replaced by several large boxes, and the total was approaching $75,000. Local businesses began contributing. News crews were documenting the unprecedented cooperation between the community and the bikers, and plans were already being discussed for making this an annual event. Tommy stood in the middle of it all, his honorary Hells Angels jacket making him look like the youngest peacemaker in history, watching his simple act of kindness ripple outward in ways he'd never imagined possible. The threatening note was crude, written in block letters on a piece of torn cardboard and shoved under the windshield wiper of Thunder Jackson's motorcycle. The message was brief but clear. Your little hero party ends today. Serpents don't. Forget serpents don't forgive, Thunder examined the note with the calm professionalism of someone who'd faced threats before. But the presence of 2,000 bikers and hundreds of civilians changed the equation significantly. This wasn't just about brotherhood business anymore. Innocent people, including an 8-year-old boy, were now potential targets. When did you find this? He asked Bear Thompson, who had discovered the note during a routine security sweep of the motorcycle parking area. 10 minutes ago. Already swept the perimeter, found tire tracks near the back fence that don't match any of our bikes. Recent, maybe 30 minutes old, Steele Murphy joined them, his expression grim as he read the threatening message. Serpents have been gunning for revenge ever since we shut down their meth operation in Detroit last year. Razor's beating was just the beginning. They know about the kid? Everyone knows about the kid now. National news, social, media, the whole works. Serpents see this gathering as weakness, Hells Angels going soft, caring more about public relations than settling scores. Thunder looked across the field, where Tommy Peterson was showing a group of younger bikers how to skip stones in the small pond at the edge of the property. The sight of hardened men laughing as an 8-year-old taught them a simple childhood game would have been heartwarming under different circumstances. Options? Thunder asked his leadership team. We could pack up and leave, suggested Carlos Rivera from the Toledo chapter. Take the heat away from the town and the kid, and show the serpents that threatening civilians gets them what they want. Bear shook his head. That sets a precedent we can't live with. Razor McKenzie, who had been quiet during the discussion, finally spoke up. They're not just threatening me anymore. They're threatening Tommy, his family, this whole community. That crosses a line. Agreed, Thunder said. But we need to be smart about this. We've got civilians everywhere, news cameras recording everything, and local law enforcement already nervous about our presence. Whatever the serpents are planning, We handle it without turning this into a war zone. Agent Sarah Chen materialized beside their group with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd been monitoring the situation from a distance. "Gentlemen, we need to talk." Thunder sized up the FBI agent, recognizing the type of federal law enforcement officer who preferred cooperation to confrontation. "Agent Chen, let me guess, you've been tracking Serpent's movement in the area. 3 stolen motorcycles reported in Grand Rapids this morning. Serpent's colors spotted at 2 different gas stations along Highway 94. They're coming, and they're coming armed." "Recommendations?" Agent Chen glanced toward Tommy, who was now teaching several bikers how to make paper airplanes from napkins left over from lunch. "Evacuate the civilians. All of them. Right now. And abandon the kid who saved one of our own." But Steele's voice carried an edge that made Agent Chen take a step back. "That's not how this brotherhood works, Mr. Murphy. I understand your loyalty, but we're talking about potential violence involving automatic weapons in a crowd that includes children and elderly residents. My job is to prevent casualties." Thunder looked around at the scene that had developed organically throughout the day. Townspeople were mingling freely with bikers. Children were playing safely among motorcycles worth more than most people's cars. And elderly residents were sharing stories with men who looked like they'd stepped out of their worst nightmares, but acted like protective grandfathers. "Agent Chen, what if we worked together on this? Your people have the surveillance and intelligence. Our people know how serpents think and fight. Maybe we coordinate a response that protects everyone. You're suggesting a joint operation between federal law enforcement and a motorcycle club. I'm suggesting that sometimes unusual problems require unusual solutions." Thunder handed her the threatening note. "Serpents made this about more than brotherhood business when they threaten civilians. That makes it your problem too." Agent Chen studied the crude message, understanding the implications. Federal law enforcement had been monitoring the Hells Angels gathering, expecting trouble from within, but external threats against civilians changed their mandate entirely. "What do you have in mind?" "Early warning system. Your surveillance tells us when and where they're coming. Our tactical knowledge tells us how they'll try to attack. We coordinate a response that neutralizes the threat without endangering civilians." Across the field, Tommy Peterson looked up from his paper airplane demonstration and waved at the group of adults having their serious conversation. His innocent smile reminded everyone present what they were really fighting to protect, not just a child's safety, but the possibility that courage and kindness could still triumph over fear and hatred. "All right," Agent Chen said finally. "Let's see if we can make this work. But the moment civilians are in immediate danger, we evacuate everyone. Deal?" "Deal," Thunder agreed, already formulating plans that would test whether an unlikely alliance could protect something precious and fragile from forces that wanted to destroy it. The hastily painted banner stretched across the front of the town hall, its message simple but powerful. "Cedar Falls stands with Tommy and visitors." Mayor Henderson had commissioned it after receiving dozens of calls from residents who'd spent the day interacting with the Hells Angels and discovered that their fears had been unfounded. When the first shots rang out at 3:47 p.m., the banner became a symbol of something much more significant than anyone had intended. Tommy Peterson was autographing motorcycle gas tanks with a permanent marker when the sharp crack of rifle fire echoed across the field. The sound was unmistakable to the many veterans among the Hells Angels, and their response was immediate and coordinated. "Get down." Thunder Jackson's voice boomed across the gathering as 2,000 bikers and hundreds of civilians dropped to the ground in unison. Tommy found himself suddenly surrounded by a protective circle of leather-clad bodies as Hells Angels formed human shields around every civilian in the area. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously, just as Agent Chen's intelligence had predicted. Serpent's gang members on stolen motorcycles roared toward the gathering from the north, east, and west, automatic weapons firing wildly into the crowd. Their plan was simple: create maximum chaos, inflict maximum casualties, and escape in the confusion. What they hadn't counted on was the military precision with which the Hells Angels responded. Razor Mackenzie, his Army Ranger training taking over despite his recent injuries, coordinated the northern defense. Serpents coming from the tree line. Civilians behind the platform, now! Bear Thompson and his Milwaukee chapter took the eastern approach, using parked motorcycles as cover while directing terrified townspeople toward the safety of the town hall. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to life-or-death situations. "Stay low, move to the building. We've got you covered." The western assault was met by Steel Murphy's Michigan chapter, who formed a living wall between the attackers and a group of children who'd been playing near the pond. Several bikers took bullets meant for civilians, their bodies absorbing rounds that would have otherwise struck innocents. Agent Chen coordinated with local law enforcement from her position behind a police barricade, calling in tactical support while marveling at the Hells Angels' disciplined response. "This is Agent Chen. We have civilian protection protocols in effect. Hells Angels are providing defensive cover for non-combatants." Tommy Peterson, pressed flat against the ground with Razor's body shielding him from above, could hear the terrible sounds of the battle raging around him. But what struck him most was the calm voice of the man protecting him. "It's okay, Tommy. These are bad men trying to hurt good people, but we're not going to let that happen. You just stay right where you are, and everything's going to be fine. Are you going to be okay, Mr. Razor?" "I'm going to be just fine, son." "We all are." The firefight lasted exactly 11 minutes and 37 seconds. When the last serpent fell or fled, the field looked like a battlefield, but the casualty count told a remarkable story. 17 Hells Angels wounded, 3 seriously. 0 civilian casualties. The bikers had quite literally used their bodies as shields, absorbing gunfire meant for people they'd met only hours earlier. Men who society labeled as dangerous had risked their lives to protect strangers' children, proving their character in the most fundamental way possible. Dr. Williams arrived with the first ambulance, expecting to find a massacre. Instead, she found wounded Hells Angels refusing treatment until every civilian had been checked for injuries. Bear Thompson, bleeding from a shoulder wound, was helping elderly Mrs. Patterson to her feet and asking if she needed medical attention. "Doctor," Bear said, when she tried to examine his wound, "check the kids first. Make sure none of them got hurt. Sir, you're bleeding severely. You need immediate attention. The kids first." "Doc, please." Tommy Peterson stood up slowly as the immediate danger passed, looking around at the aftermath of violence that had been intended to destroy something beautiful. Several of his new friends were hurt, bleeding, but still more concerned about his safety than their own injuries. "Why did those bad men want to hurt us?" he asked Razor, who was checking him for any signs of injury. "Because some people think that kindness is weakness, Tommy. They see what happened here today, people from different worlds coming together, being good to each other, and it makes them angry. They want to prove that fear is stronger than love. But they're wrong, aren't they?" Razor looked around at the scene surrounding them. Hells Angels were tending to wounded townspeople. Civilians were bringing water and first aid supplies to injured bikers. The community that had been afraid of these men 12 hours earlier was now working alongside them to care for the wounded and comfort the traumatized. "Yeah, Tommy," Razor said with absolute certainty. "They're wrong, and what happened here today proved it." The banner still hung across the town hall, torn by bullet holes, but still readable. Its message now carrying weight that its creators never could have imagined. Cedar Falls truly did stand with Tommy and their visitors. In the most literal sense possible, the acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air as sirens wailed in the distance, but the field had fallen into an eerie calm. Smoking bullet casings littered the ground like deadly confetti, physical reminders of violence that had tried and failed to destroy something beautiful. Tommy Peterson picked up one of the brass casings, turning it over in his small hands as he tried to understand how something so small could cause so much hurt. "Don't touch those." "Son," said Deputy Martinez gently, kneeling beside Tommy, "they're evidence now." "Evidence of what?" "Evidence that some people choose hate over hope, but also evidence that other people choose to protect what matters, no matter the cost." Around them, the aftermath of the battle revealed the true character of everyone involved. Hell's Angels with gunshot wounds sat patiently waiting for medical attention, while townspeople, who'd been strangers that morning, brought them water, held pressure bandages on their injuries, and offered comfort to men who'd risked their lives for people they barely knew. Bear Thompson sat propped against his motorcycle, his left shoulder wrapped in a makeshift bandage created from a torn Hell's Angels t-shirt. Blood had soaked through the fabric, but he was more concerned with the elderly woman sitting beside him. "Mrs. Patterson, you sure you're not hurt? That was pretty scary stuff." "I'm fine, dear," she replied, her voice shaky but determined. "But you're not. You took that bullet to protect us, didn't you?" Bear managed a weak smile. "Ma'am, that's what decent people do. They protect folks who can't protect themselves, but we were so afraid of you. We boarded up our windows, called you dangerous. And then, when real danger came, you saved us. Fear's natural, Mrs. Patterson. Can't blame people for being scared of what they don't understand. But Tommy there," he nodded toward the boy who was now helping paramedics carry medical supplies. "He showed us all that understanding comes from looking past the surface to see what's really inside." Chief Dalton surveyed the scene with amazement that bordered on disbelief. In 30 years of law enforcement, he'd never witnessed anything like what had just occurred. A massive gunfight had erupted in the middle of his town, and the only casualties were among the men who'd been labeled as the potential threat. "Agent Chen," he called to the FBI agent who was coordinating with state police. "How many arrests did we make?" 14 Serpents members in custody, 3 more in the hospital under guard. We recovered enough weapons and ammunition to supply a small army. They came here planning a massacre. And civilian casualties? 0, not 1. These Hell's Angels literally used their bodies as human shields. I've seen military units with less discipline and coordination. Tommy Peterson approached the group of officials, still wearing his honorary leather jacket despite his parents' gentle suggestions that he might want to take it off, given the circumstances. "Officer Chen," he said politely, "are the bad men going to jail now?" "Yes, Tommy, they're going to jail for a very long time." "Good. And are my friends going to be okay?" "Mr. Bear is hurt pretty bad." Agent Chen knelt down to Tommy's level, studying the remarkable child who'd somehow become the catalyst for one of the most unusual law enforcement situations in FBI history. "Your friends are going to be fine, Tommy. They're tough, and they had something worth fighting for. That makes all the difference. What did they have worth fighting for? You, Tommy, and your family, and everyone in this town who showed them kindness today. Sometimes when people prove they're worth protecting, other people find strength they didn't know they..." Had Dr. Williams finished treating the last of the wounded Hell's Angels and found herself surrounded by men who should have been her patients, but instead kept asking about the well-being of others. "Gentlemen," she announced to the group, "I need to say something. I've been an emergency room doctor for 15 years. I've treated gang violence, domestic abuse, random shootings, and every other kind of human cruelty you can imagine. But what I witnessed here today was the opposite of all that. You men put yourselves in harm's way to protect people you didn't even know. That's not criminal behavior. That's heroic behavior. Thunder Jackson, sporting a bandaged arm and several butterfly stitches on his forehead, stepped forward to address the crowd of civilians and law enforcement officers who'd gathered. "Folks, today was supposed to be about honoring a brave kid who saved one of our own. Instead, it became about proving that courage isn't about the colors you wear or the group you belong to. It's about the choices you make when everything's on the line." He looked directly at Tommy Peterson, who was standing hand in hand with his parents. somehow looking even smaller in his oversized honorary jacket. Tommy, you started something here that nobody could have predicted. Your simple act of kindness brought together people who thought they had nothing in common. And when evil tried to destroy what you built, good people of all kinds stood up to protect it. The smoking bullet casing in Tommy's pocket would become a permanent reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things in life are born from the ashes of the worst that humanity has to offer. And that courage, once awakened, has the power to transform everything it touches. The community quilt began as a simple gesture from Martha Henderson, the mayor's wife, who arrived at the field 3 days after the attack, carrying her sewing basket and a determined expression. She'd spent sleepless nights thinking about how to honor what had happened, how to create something lasting that would commemorate the day when strangers became family through shared courage. I want to make something that tells this story, she announced to the small group of Hell's Angels who were still in town, helping with cleanup and recovery efforts. Something that shows how different pieces can come together to create something beautiful and strong. Bear Thompson, his arm still in a sling from the bullet wound he'd taken protecting civilians, looked skeptically at the collection of fabric patches Martha had spread across a picnic table. Ma'am, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not much of a sewing man. You don't have to be, Martha replied, with the patience of someone who'd spent decades organizing community projects. You just have to contribute something that represents who you are. A patch from your vest, maybe, or something from your motorcycle. I'll do the sewing. Within hours, word of Martha's project had spread throughout both the remaining Hell's Angels and the local community. People began arriving with contributions that told the story of their transformation from fear to understanding. Mrs. Patterson brought a piece of the apron she'd been wearing when she first offered cookies to the bikers, explaining, "This represents the moment I stopped being afraid and started being grateful." Tommy Peterson contributed a corner of his honorary Hell's Angels jacket, carefully cut by his mother after he insisted it was the right thing to do. So everyone can remember that being brave brought all these people together, he explained seriously. Steel. Murphy removed a small patch from his motorcycle jacket, one that commemorated his military service in Vietnam. For brotherhood that crosses all boundaries, he said simply. Principal Morrison donated fabric from the Cedar Falls Elementary School banner, while Dr. Williams contributed a piece of surgical scrub that had been worn during the treatment of wounded bikers. Agent Chen, surprising everyone, offered a corner of the FBI windbreaker she'd worn during the crisis, saying, "For cooperation that proved impossible things are possible." As Martha worked on the quilt throughout the week, her dining room became an unofficial community center where unlikely friendships continued to develop. Hell's Angels, who'd planned to leave after the ceremony, found reasons to extend their stay, helping with everything from hospital visits to grocery runs for elderly residents who'd been affected by the trauma. Razor Mackenzie spent his afternoons reading to children at the elementary school, his intimidating appearance forgotten as kids gathered around to hear stories about courage and kindness. His presence had initially concerned some parents, but Tommy Peterson's enthusiastic endorsement and the children's obvious comfort with him soon won over even the most skeptical adults. "Mr. Razor?" asked 6-year-old Emma Martinez during one of his reading sessions. "Were you really chained to a tree like in a fairy tale?" "I was, Emma, but the important part isn't that I was in trouble. The important part is that someone came to help me when I needed it most, like how the bikers helped us when the bad men came." Exactly like that. Sometimes the people who look scary on the outside are the ones who do the bravest things when it matters. The quilt grew larger each day as more community members contributed pieces of their story. The local newspaper donated fabric from their special edition covering the events. The fire department contributed material from uniforms worn during the emergency response. Even some of the arrested Serpent's gang members, through their court-appointed attorneys, sent pieces of clothing from before their criminal involvement. asking that their contribution represent redemption and the possibility of choosing a different path. Martha arranged the patches with careful attention to their symbolic relationships. Tommy's honorary Hell's Angels patch was placed at the center, surrounded by contributions from both bikers and townspeople in patterns that showed how individual courage had created expanding circles of connection and understanding. Each patch tells part of the story, she explained to a reporter documenting the project. But together, they tell the whole story. How fear can be overcome by understanding, how strangers can become family, how one child's courage can change an entire community. The finished quilt measured 8 feet by 12 feet, large enough to serve as a wall hanging in the town hall. Its pattern resembled a sunburst, with Tommy's contribution at the center and rays of community connection extending outward in all directions. The colors ranged from the black leather of motorcycle patches to the bright primary colors of school banners, from the sterile green of medical scrubs to the deep blue of police uniforms. When the quilt was finally completed and hung in the town hall, it became more than just a commemoration. It became a promise, a visual reminder that the bonds formed through shared courage were permanent, that the lessons learned about looking beyond appearances to see character were not forgotten, and that the community of Cedar Falls had been forever changed by an 8-year-old boy's simple decision to help a stranger in need. Visitors came from surrounding towns to see the quilt and hear the story it represented. Each viewing renewed the community's commitment to the values it symbolized: courage, compassion, and the understanding that real strength comes from protecting those who need protection, regardless of how different they might appear on the surface. The foundation charter for Tommy's Children's Fund was signed on a warm September morning, 6 months after the events that had transformed Cedar Falls from a quiet town into a symbol of hope recognized across the nation. The legal documents establishing the charity bore signatures from Hell's Angels, chapter presidents, local business leaders, medical professionals, and federal law enforcement officials, a combination that would have seemed impossible before an 8-year-old boy had shown them what courage looked like. Tommy Peterson, now 9 years old and wearing a suit that made him look uncomfortably formal, sat at the conference table in Mayor Henderson's office, carefully writing his name on the charter with the same concentration he'd once used to write letters to the Hell's Angels. "This is really official, isn't it?" he asked Thunder Jackson, who sat beside him wearing what appeared to be the first business suit he'd owned in decades. "Very official, Tommy. This means that the money we raised, and all the money that keeps coming in from people who heard your story, will help sick kids for years and years to come." The fund had grown far beyond anyone's expectations. What began as a spontaneous collection in a mason jar had evolved into a national phenomenon, with donations arriving from across the country and even internationally. Motorcycle clubs that had never worked with charities before were organizing benefit rides. Children's hospitals were implementing Tommy Peterson protocols that emphasized treating all visitors with dignity regardless of their appearance. Dr. Williams, now serving as the fund's medical advisor, reviewed the preliminary budget projections. "We're looking at approximately $400,000 in the first year alone. That's enough to purchase the pediatric equipment we needed, establish an emergency assistance program for families facing medical crises, and fund research into children's trauma recovery." Agent Chen, who had become an unlikely advocate for community policing initiatives inspired by the Cedar Falls cooperation, added her perspective. "The Department of Justice is studying what happened here as a model for how law enforcement can work with community groups that have traditionally been viewed as adversarial. Your story, Tommy, is changing how we think about public safety and community protection." Razor McKenzie, who had officially retired from active Hell's Angels duties to work full-time with the foundation, smiled as he watched Tommy struggle with the oversized pen required for legal documents. In the months since the attack, Reza had discovered a calling he'd never expected, working with children who'd experienced trauma, helping them find courage in the face of fear. "Tommy," Reza said gently, "do you remember what you told me in the hospital about helping people being what you're supposed to do?" "Yeah, Mom always said that." "Well, now thousands of people are learning that same lesson because of what you started. Kids who are scared in hospitals are getting help because you weren't scared in the woods. The Foundation's first major initiative was already underway. Children's hospitals in 12 states had received grants to establish Courage Corners, spaces designed specifically for young patients to meet with volunteers who'd overcome their own fears and traumas. Many of these volunteers were Hells Angels members who discovered an unexpected talent for helping children find strength during difficult times. Principal Morrison, representing the educational component of the Foundation, outlined their plans for school programs. "We're developing curricula that teach children about looking beyond appearances to see character." Tommy's story becomes a case study in how individual courage can create positive change in entire communities. The documentary film crew that had been following the story since the original gathering was finishing their project, with proceeds designated for the Foundation. Director Maria Santos had initially come to Cedar Falls expecting to film a story about motorcycle club culture, but had instead captured something much more significant: the documentation of how prejudice could be overcome through personal connection and shared values. "Tommy," Director Santos asked during a break in the charter signing ceremony, "what do you want people to learn from your story?" Tommy considered the question with the seriousness that had become characteristic of him since becoming an accidental public figure. "I want them to learn that scary-looking people aren't always scary, and that helping somebody who needs help is always the right thing to do, even if you're scared." "And what do you want to be when you grow up?" "I want to help people like Mr. Reza helps people now. I want to show kids that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." The charter signing concluded with photographs that would appear in newspapers across the country, images of a 9-year-old boy surrounded by Hells Angels, FBI agents, doctors, teachers, and community leaders, all united by their commitment to turning one child's courage into lasting help for other children. As the official ceremony ended and adults began discussing implementation details, Tommy slipped outside to the town square where the community quilt was visible through the town hall windows. The fabric patches that told the story of his friendship with Reza and the transformation of his community served as a daily reminder that extraordinary things could grow from simple acts of kindness. Bear Thompson found him there, his motorcycle parked nearby as he prepared to return to Milwaukee after another extended visit to Cedar Falls. "Proud of you, kid," Bear said simply. "You started something that's going to help a lot of people." "Mr. Bear," Tommy asked, "do you think people will remember this story when I'm grown up?" "Tommy, I think people will be telling this story long after we're all gone. Stories about courage and kindness, those are the ones that last. Forever." The Foundation Charter represented more than legal documentation. It was proof that individual acts of courage could create institutional change, that temporary moments of bravery could become permanent forces for good in the world. The time capsule ceremony took place exactly 1 year after Tommy Peterson had first heard groaning in the Michigan woods and followed the sound toward a chained Hell's Angel who would change his life forever. The small metal container, buried beneath the oak tree, where a memorial plaque now marked the spot of Reza's rescue, held items that told the complete story of how a single act of courage had transformed an entire community. Tommy, now 9 years old and more confident in his role as an accidental symbol of hope, carefully placed the final item into the capsule, the original metal canteen that had carried the water he'd offered to a dying stranger. The dented aluminum surface bore scratches from that day in the woods, but it had become perhaps the most important artifact in the collection. Someday, maybe 50 years from now, someone will open this and wonder how all these different things fit together. Tommy said to the assembled crowd that included many familiar faces from that incredible weekend 12 months earlier. Razor Mackenzie, standing beside the boy who'd saved his life and inadvertently launched a career in youth counseling, added his own contribution to the time capsule, a photograph of himself in military uniform alongside a more recent picture of him reading to children at the hospital. For whoever finds this, these photos show what I was before Tommy found me, and what I became because he found me. Thunder Jackson, whose regional presidency had evolved to include community outreach programs inspired by the Cedar Falls model, placed a folded Hells Angels banner into the capsule. This represents brotherhood that expanded beyond our own members to include anyone willing to show courage and kindness. Mayor Henderson contributed the original police barricade plans alongside newspaper clippings, documenting how the feared biker invasion had become an annual celebration of community unity, to show how fear can be transformed into understanding when people choose to see past surface appearances. The annual Tommy Day celebration had drawn visitors from across the Midwest. Families with children who'd been helped by the foundation came to meet the boy whose story had funded their medical care. Hells Angels chapters that had never visited Michigan before made the pilgrimage to Cedar Falls part of their regular riding calendar. Law enforcement agencies sent representatives to study the community policing model that had emerged from the cooperation between federal agents and motorcycle club members. Agent Chen, now leading a Justice Department initiative on community partnerships, sealed her contribution to the time capsule, copies of policy documents that had been rewritten based on lessons learned during the crisis. For future law enforcement officers, proof that unusual partnerships can produce extraordinary results when everyone focuses on protecting what matters. Dr. Williams added medical records documenting the lives saved and improved through foundation funding, along with letters from children who'd found courage during their hospital stays by hearing Tommy's story, to remind future doctors that healing involves more than medicine. It requires hope. And hope often comes from unexpected sources. The community quilt, now permanently displayed in the town hall, served as backdrop for the ceremony. Its patches had faded slightly over the year, but the stories they represented had only grown stronger through retelling. School children gave tours to visitors, explaining how each piece represented someone who'd chosen courage over fear during those transformative days. Tommy Peterson, the shy 8-year-old who'd become an internationally recognized symbol of childhood courage, stepped forward to address the crowd for the final time before the time capsule was sealed. A year ago, I was just collecting pine cones for my mom's craft project. I heard someone who needed help, and I helped him because that's what you're supposed to do. I didn't know it would turn into all this. He gestured toward the crowd of hundreds gathered around the memorial site. But I learned something important. When you do the right thing, even when you're scared, it makes other people want to do right things too. Mr. Razor taught me that courage spreads from person to person, like ripples in a pond. And all these people here today are proof that those ripples can travel really, really far. He paused, looking around at faces that included Hells Angels, FBI agents, doctors, teachers, and families who traveled hundreds of miles to be part of this anniversary. I hope whoever opens this time capsule someday will learn that regular people can do extraordinary things just by being kind to each other. And I hope they'll remember that being different on the outside doesn't matter if you're good on the inside. As the time capsule was lowered into the ground beneath the oak tree, Thunder Jackson began the traditional Hells Angels salute for fallen brothers, but modified it to honor something different: the death of prejudice and the birth of understanding. 2,000 motorcycle engines revved in unison, their thunder rolling across Cedar Falls one final time as a blessing rather than a threat. Tommy Peterson walked home that evening past storefronts that still displayed photos from the previous year's gathering, past the town hall, where the community quilt reminded everyone daily of their transformation, past neighbors who waved and smiled because they'd learned that courage was contagious and kindness was powerful. In his bedroom that night, he carefully placed Razor's Purple Heart medal on his nightstand beside the wooden cross his grandmother had given him. Two symbols of courage from different generations, reminding him that bravery wasn't about size or strength, it was about choosing to help when help was needed. Regardless of the cost, the story of the little boy who stumbled upon a Hell's Angel chained to a tree had ended, exactly where it began, with a child who understood that doing the right thing was always worth the risk, and whose simple act of compassion had proven that individual courage could indeed change the world.